Hi friends, my name is Jenny and I'm back today to do another video. Today I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in July. However, disclaimer here, this is actually being filmed a week early. It's July 24th right now, because when you'll be seeing this next weekend, I will actually be out of town. I'm a bridesmaid in my cousin's wedding, which is happening next weekend, which is crazy. And also then I'll be visiting one of my best friends that lives in Minneapolis. So there will be a vlog, I'm hoping, of that trip along with reading 2 of my August arcs. So do look out for that in the next couple of weeks. Right after that I'm moving, so who knows what my channel will look like in the next month or so, slash even longer than that. I'm hoping to continue making videos, but we'll just see what happens. But I did want to film this video now and get it scheduled and kind of posted so that I can have something for next weekend. And I also did obviously want to talk about these books. So I've been rambling long enough. Let's just get into now the stats of the 8 books that I finished so far in July. There are 2 books that I'm currently reading that I definitely will finish probably before I leave for my trip on Wednesday. So I'm gonna pop those ones on at the end, especially because I don't think I'll have a ton of thoughts on them that I will need to share in a later video. So in terms of the stats for the month, as I said, I read 8 books. Of those 8, all 8 of them were written by women, and 3 of the 8 authors were white authors. I also listened to 3 audiobooks this month, read 2 books as ebooks, and the other 3 were physical books, so quite a nice kind of spread in terms of the medium in which I consumed the book. I also read 2 library books this month, and the other 6 were all from my shelves, which does mean that including 2 books that I also took off my shelves unread, I got rid of 8 books this month and only brought in 2, so my total TBR is down by 6 books, and my physical TBR is down by 2 books since the start of the year, which is really exciting. 4 of the 8 books that I read this month were published in 2021, 2 of the books were published in 2020, 1 was published in 2014, and the other was published in 2004. I also read 1 YA book, 1 middle grade book, and then the other 6 books were written for an adult audience. And then finally, all 8 of the books I read this month or finished so far in the month were fiction. So as always, starting with the book that I enjoyed the least and moving to the book I enjoyed the most, I had 2 3-star reads this month. The first of those was The Girl and the Ghost by Hannah Alcoff. This was the middle grade novel, and I read this for the Muslim middle grade prompt for the Reading Women Challenge, which I should have a kind of mid-year check-in video about that already on my channel, which I'll put a link to up in the cards above as well as in the description box below. But I read this for this challenge and I thought it was just okay. The story follows a young girl by the name of Soraya who lives in rural Malaysia. Hannah Alcoff is also from Malaysia and she currently lives in Kuala Lumpur. And this kind of builds on a lot of Malaysian folklore, I believe, in that Soraya's grandmother has this ghost familiar companion who kind of assists her in getting up to some mischievous acts and kind of assists her with getting revenge on people who have wronged her, etc. But after the grandmother dies, Soraya becomes kind of the owner, if you want to put it that way, of the ghost. And so then the ghost is kind of acting on behalf of Soraya in some potentially not great ways. And so the primary kind of crux of the novel is this idea of friendship and friends not behaving in the way they're kind of supposed to. And the story kind of takes off from there as we also dive into a mystery surrounding like the origins of this ghost. So the parts of this middle grade book that I liked were the elements of kind of learning more about Malaysian folklore and Malaysian culture in general, as Malaysia is really a place I know almost nothing about. I have learned a bit about other countries in Southeast Asia. I learned about Thailand when I was in elementary school, as that was a fascination of one of my teachers, and so he taught us a lot about Thailand and even like a little bit of Thai, which I don't remember anymore. But I don't know a ton about the rest of Southeast Asia, and so it was nice to kind of gain more context about that part of the world. But the rest of the novel I didn't super get along with. Middle grade is unfortunately somewhat hit or miss for me. When I enjoy middle grade, I absolutely love it. I think it has such a way of kind of capturing ideas of morality and just making you feel really intense emotions that I find even adult books can't capture the nuance of emotions sometimes as well. And I guess that's in part because children just feel emotions somewhat more intensely than adults often do. But this book definitely kind of veered more into the like action adventure side of middle grade that actual middle grade readers probably enjoy, and so for that reason I couldn't fully kind of jump on to the story. I also, in terms of the kind of morality building lesson teaching part of this middle grade, thought that the way that friendship and jealousy was discussed could have been a little more nuanced, because the ghost character really does some things to Soraya's friends that are really questionable, and while Soraya does say like those things were not okay for you to do out of jealousy, at the same time I kind of wanted even more repercussions for the ghost because like he did some really terrible things. So that was another gripe I had with it, is that I just wish that more of that was reinforced, of the importance of not acting on our jealousy when we have it with friends, because as someone who like often works with this age group, I think those kind of morality teaching lessons are something that I particularly look for when reading middle grade, and I just wish that that had been fleshed out a bit more. That being said, I do think if you're looking for a book for this prompt, it was an enjoyable read. It was relatively quick. I listened to the audiobook and I was listening to it kind of a little bit each night, and then like wrapped it up one night while I was cooking dinner, and it went by fairly quickly, I would say. So yeah, I mean, it was a fine middle grade. As I said, I gave it 3 stars. Then another 3-star read I had actually talked about in my July arc vlog, which I'll put a link to up in the cards above, as well as in the description box below, and that was Ghost Horse by Peek Chung Fung. This book is a series of vignettes following our main narrator as she's kind of growing up, and then as her father begins to get very sick and actually ends up dying, and we're kind of just following her processing that grief and also processing the ways that she related to him and had a relationship with him. And I thought it was fine. I think it was a little too short and a little too lacking in kind of emotional nuance, that it wasn't able to capture me very well. So I only give it 3 stars, but it was a pretty quick, easy read, and I did talk about it more in that vlog. And then moving into my 3.5-star reads, I had 2 of those this month, the first of which I have also talked about in a recent video, which will be my 5-star prediction video, which should also already be up by the time this video goes up, so I'll put a link to that also in the cards above, as well as in the description box below. But that was Conjure Woman by Afia Atakora. This one was a 5-star prediction for me, which is why I talked about it in my 5-star prediction wrap-up. And unfortunately, as I said, I only gave this 3.5 stars. Sorry if the angle has changed slightly. The camera did just take a topple. It's fine. It didn't actually fall, but it just went so I grabbed it before it actually fell to the ground. But the premise of Conjure Woman by Afia Atakara is that we follow 2 different timelines, the first of which takes place in the years leading up to the Civil War in Georgia, I want to say, but it might be a different state in the South. And in that timeline, we follow Miss Maybelle, who is a conjure woman or a kind of healer on a plantation, and because of that, she's very revered both by the community but also by the plantation owner. And so we're kind of following her story as we lead up to the Civil War, and as the 2 stories begin to kind of come closer and closer together. Then in the second timeline, which is really more the primary timeline, we're following Rue, who is Miss Maybelle's daughter. Her timeline takes place in the kind of years after the Civil War, so during the Reconstruction period, as she interacts with the community that has been built around all the formerly enslaved people that lived on this plantation, and they still actually live on the same land for reasons that are explained over the course of the novel. So this book had a lot of things that I really enjoyed about it, and a lot of things that I think, had they been better executed, I would have loved this novel a lot more. So I think one of those things was this exploration of conjure women and healing and kind of medicinal practices, particularly, I don't want to call it traditional, but traditional is the word that comes to mind, medicinal practices, and how that was performed on both plantations but also in Black communities post Civil War, as I think that aspect of medicine is one that's really interesting to me, and so I liked the explorations of that in this book. Particularly, there's a lot of discussion around like midwifery, giving birth, taking care of babies in that kind of immediate aftermath of birth time. That also was a kind of major point of this novel that, again, I also enjoyed. I also really liked Atakura's writing style. I thought she was a really strong writer and definitely would read more from her. However, the book as a whole, to me, didn't really feel like it had a plot that was going anywhere. Like, it kind of just, we meandered through different things, and there was a plot, but it was a very chaotic plot at that. Like, there is, so part of the plot is that this preacher comes to the community in Rue's timeline and begins kind of impacting and changing people's way of thinking about Rue's role in the community, particularly given her kind of more non-Christian spiritual healing practices, and how that differs from the idea of baptism and rebirth and using Christianity as a form of healing. Like, so there's some kind of discussion and tension between those 2 things, but then at the same time, Master Abel, who is the Christian preacher that comes to the community, also gets involved with Rue, and so there's kind of a plot line there as well. There kind of honestly were just too many plot lines, I think, that didn't all come together in a super cohesive way. I also struggle a bit with like suspension of disbelief in this novel, because the community living like on the same plantation land just did not strike me as particularly realistic. Especially, I mean, there is an explanation for it that's given in the novel as to why this Black community is allowed to live on the same land that they lived historically when they were enslaved, but are no longer enslaved and they're no longer under the control of the owner of the land. But I, at the same time, just like kind of struggled with, just because it really did not seem realistic at all. So I don't know, I think there were parts of this that just seemed like really interesting rabbit holes of research, and the writing was really good, but as a plot and in terms of kind of being more realistic, it failed in a lot of kind of critical ways for me, so I only gave it 3.5 stars. Then the other book that I gave 3.5 stars, I also talked about in my July ARC vlog, which was The President and the Frog by Carolyn de Robertis. Again, very similarly to Ghost Forest, this is kind of a book in vignettes. The chapters are really short, and we are following a former president of a South American country who is very loosely based, or actually perhaps even closely based, on El Pepe, who was the president of Uruguay in the early 2010s, and he was a very kind of democratic socialist president. A lot of people really appreciated the progressive mindset that he brought to the country, and he also was imprisoned during the dictatorship in the 70s. So the same is all true for our fictional president in The President and the Frog, and we're kind of going back to his imprisonment, and then also in a more present day timeline, he is being interviewed by a Norwegian reporter about his kind of ideas about politics and community building. So I enjoyed what this novel was trying to say. I think Carolyn de Robertis has really interesting and well thought out thoughts about politics and our role as citizens in the political sphere, and also community building and community organizing. I appreciate hearing her thoughts about them. However, this again did not feel like a fully fleshed out novel. It was more a series of ideas that had all been put together and then classified as a novel, if that makes sense. So yeah, both of these 3.5 star reads. I think really interesting premise, also things that I'm really interested in, but in terms of like a reading experience with a novel and a plot, I didn't love them. But I do talk again about this one more in that vlog, so do check that out if you want to hear more thoughts about it. And my only 4-star read of the month was Those Who Leap and Those Who Stay by Elena Ferrante. This is the third in her Neapolitan quartet, which begins with My Brilliant Friend. And the basic premise of this quartet is that we follow two girls, Elena and Lila, as they grow up from their early childhood, beginning in like the 1950s in Naples, Italy, and I believe concluding with them as old women in the 2000s-ish. I'm not entirely sure because I haven't gotten there yet. This particular installment follows them from around their mid-20s to their mid-30s, I would say, and definitely had a lot of twists and turns. I think my favorite part about this quartet has absolutely been that just as you're kind of getting comfortable in the kind of daily monotony of life and the book is actually starting to get a bit boring, that's when something really jaw-dropping happens. So I really appreciate Elena Ferrante's way of like continuing to keep you engaged in the story while also reminding you of like the monotony of life and how these big moments happen sometimes that just totally break open the kind of life that you've been like chugging along in. So that's probably my favorite part. I mean, I also just love how reflective they are and how philosophical they are. This book in particular touched a lot on the politics of the time. In fact, I'm actually including this in the Reading Women Challenge for the book about a woman in politics, because Elena, our main narrator, definitely gets involved in a lot of political activism, as does Lila, in a number of kind of different ways. And so, although not in a governmental role, but you know, the exterior of politics, political activism, writing about politics, that type of thing. So yeah, definitely very interesting, and I'm glad too that I've kind of both asked my dad and also did some research into Italian politics at this time, because I think if you don't know anything about Italian politics, a lot of this book will go over your head. I mean, some of it even still went over my head, but yeah, I really enjoyed it. Definitely continuing to enjoy the book, and I'm actually reading the fourth one right now, so I'll talk about it more in a minute. Then I had two 4.5 star reads this month. The first of those was the very first book I read this month, and honestly, July has been really long and I don't remember this book super well, but that was The Five Wounds by Kristen Valdez-Quaid. This I read as an audiobook, but I actually received an ebook arc of it from W.W. Norton. This came out back at the very end of March, I think, and I wasn't able to get to it at that time, but thank you to the publisher for providing me with an early copy. And I enjoyed this quite a lot. As I said, I gave it 4.5 stars. It is a family saga-ish that's set over the course of 1 year, following a family that lives in rural New Mexico in like the northern part in a town called Las Peñas. And so we're following 3 generations of a family over the course of the year. The main character kind of is Amadeo, who is in the middle of the family. He has a daughter whose name is Angel, who's 16, and then his mother is Yolanda, and all three of them are kind of the primary characters of the book. And the book opens with Amadeo's daughter Angel arriving to the house where Amadeo lives with his mother Yolanda, and Angel is 7 months pregnant at 16. Amadeo is around 32, so he also had Angel when he was about 16, 17, and so Angel then begins to live with Amadeo and Yolanda, and the story kind of takes off from there over the course of the year. So I really enjoyed this novel. I thought the writing style was fantastic. I definitely want to read more of Kristen Valdez-Quade's work. It was very vivid imagery, also kind of humorous at times. I enjoyed those parts of it, and I also just really liked the character work here. I think all of the characters here at times are really unlikable, but in a way that makes a lot of sense. I think they're very realistic for the actions that they take and the decisions they make. Even if it's objectively a bad decision, you understand why they've made it. I also really like the growth that every character goes through. This book is almost 500 pages, and the characters really change a lot, particularly in the last 10%. We get a lot of character growth, which I wish it had maybe been stretched out a little more fluidly throughout the rest of the book, but I did appreciate really seeing characters change and grow because of the consequences of the actions that they take during this book. I also really liked the way that it explored family dynamics and relationships and how those relationships change over time and because of big life events. I think that was captured really well and really beautifully. It was kind of a classic family saga, but it also took some of those family saga tropes and flipped them around, particularly given that everyone is kind of so close in age. Yolanda is only about 50 or 60, Amadeo is only 32, and he has a 16-year-old daughter, and then obviously Angel is 16, and then she also has a son whose name I don't remember, but he's a little baby and he's very cute, and he's kind of a guiding light for a lot of the characters, which I really liked. So yeah, overall I would recommend it. It was really good. It was a very long audiobook. I listened to this one on audio, but I also thought the narrator did a pretty good job. Then the other 4.5 star read I also listened to on audio, which was Mr. Impossible by Maggie Stiefvater, who also has a fantastic audio narrator. It's Will Patton, who apparently also narrates the Stephen King audiobooks, which makes sense because he has a really creepy voice, but also it's perfect. It's very moody and atmospheric, which is great for the vibe of the stories that Maggie Stiefvater writes. This one has the world's ugliest cover. I just want to make a disclaimer about that now, but it is the second in the Dreamer trilogy, which is the follow-on series from the Raven cycle, which is a YA kind of magical realism, paranormal, fantasy. It's set in our world, but I guess it's urban fantasy. I don't know the terminology very well, but it has kind of this weird magical element that has to do with dreaming and bringing things back from your dreams that come to life. That's kind of the premise in part of the first series, but particularly of this second series. So because this is technically the 6th book in this overarching series, I'm not able to tell a ton about this plot, but I enjoyed it. This is a wild ride for sure. If you have been following these books, this one definitely goes to places that are really unexpected. I will say at first that this very much felt like a middle book in a series in that not as ton was happening, but I do think that she kind of tied some things up nicely while also breaking open a lot of new questions that are left unanswered for the 3rd book to answer. So all in all, I feel like it was a really successful sequel, 2nd book in a series. I also liked the thematic explorations as always. I will say, and I mean, I feel like this could be, it's a YA book, and so I don't need to put on a super academically critical brain when thinking about this book, but parts of the book did lean into this idea of wilderness and untouched land being the most pure and valuable thing, which, there's some room to kind of make that a more nuanced conversation about how, that idea is also based in settler colonialism and the idea that unchanged environments are natural and that type of thing, which I could get into, but I also don't feel that's entirely necessary. I also think that there is some nuance in this book to that discussion. So I don't know, those were some thoughts that were kind of moving through my brain as I was reading this book, because in the past I have really enjoyed the kind of way that environment and connection to the land is kind of explored in these books. I also really like the way that Maggie Stiefvater talks about art, and that art plays a very large role in this book, and I think she pulls ideas about art and its almost a magical ability to elucidate emotions that are sometimes unexpected that I also really liked about this book. So yeah, I thought it was highly successful. I'm definitely excited for the third one. I really hope the third one does not have these really ugly covers, but I know it's going to. I have no idea also when it's coming out, but whenever it comes out, I'll be reading it for sure. And then the final book is also yet another book in a series, so I can't tell too much about the plot, but I did give this one 5 stars. It was absolutely phenomenal, and that's Fool's Fate by Robin Hobb. This is the third book in the Tawny Man trilogy, which is the third series in the realm of the Elderlings, which I feel like if you watch any fantasy booktube at all, you've absolutely heard of this series because every fantasy booktuber is either currently reading it or has read it in the past and absolutely loved it. And I started this way back in 2017 when I went abroad because these books are so long and I needed a chunker of a book to kind of work through while I was abroad because I knew I would have a lot of free time without a lot of self-service. And I've slowly since been making my way through the rest of the books. Finally decided to pick this one up at the beginning of June, and honestly during my week off I was planning on reading it through the rest of July. I read like the second half or so over the course of like a few days because the plot just like really kicked up a notch. But the overarching idea of this series is that it follows our main character Fitz, who is the bastard son of a prince of a kingdom, very classic fantasy trope, and he is closely involved with the Fool, who is the court jester at the beginning of the novel but becomes a lot more of an important political figure later on in the series. And so this book, I literally could not tell you a single thing about the plot because it spoils all the 9 books previous. It's very much a culmination of all of the previous plot points that we've seen so far in the series, and I thought it was done fantastically. I loved the way that things were tied together. I loved the way that the reader gets to bring the understanding that they've gotten through the previous 8 books to this book and have meaningful that makes what's happening in this book. I also loved the kind of philosophical elements of this book, particularly in thinking about the choices we make in our lives and how those choices impact other people and sometimes have ramifications that we don't intend, and also thinking about how sometimes the choice that we want to make is not the choice that is best for us or in particular for other people. I think both of those things are really grappled with in this novel and grappled with in ways that are really moving and powerful. I loved this book. I thought it was phenomenal. Definitely was brought to tears several times during the last half especially. I'm super excited now to continue on with the series, although I have heard that this is kind of the peak, which disappoints me a bit, but at the same time this book was so phenomenal that even if it's a peak, I'm sure the rest of the books will be pretty good. If you have been thinking about picking this series up, like starting with Assassin's Apprentice, I think is the first one, I would recommend it. You're definitely going to be like in it for the long haul. Like I've been reading these for what, 3 years now? 4 years almost? Probably close to 4 years. And I am only halfway done. So like it's gonna be a while. It's gonna be another 10 years before I finish this series, but I would recommend it. They are really well written. The character work's phenomenal, and also like the themes and the way that they build on one another and leave you to put pieces together in a super satisfying way is just like unparalleled. So moving now into quickly the 2 books that I'm currently reading. The first of those, as I alluded to previously, is The Story of the Lost Child by Elena Ferrante. This is book 4 in the Neapolitan Quartet. I'm about 260 pages into it, and it's like 470 pages long. I do so a little over halfway. I do have to finish this sooner rather than later because my friends and I are meeting for a book club to discuss this book. I am enjoying it quite a lot. There have been a lot of twists and turns. As I texted my friends a couple of days ago, I said page 238, big in all caps, oh no. So that's about how I'm feeling right now with how this book's gonna go. Definitely intrigued to see how it wraps up because I have a feeling that where we are in their friendship is not how we will end this book, but we'll see. So yeah, really enjoying this one. Definitely will be finishing it at some point. I'm sure I'll give it like somewhere in the 4 to 5 star range, I will imagine. And then I also am rereading Normal People by Sally Rooney. I'm about a third of the way through this one, and I'm listening to the audiobook of it. I first read this back in probably April of 2019 because that's when I got this as a book of the month book, and honestly fell in love with this. This is my favorite book of all time. I absolutely love it. Well, The Namesake is also one of my favorites, but this is probably the actual favorite. I just love the characters in here. I love the discussion of complicated relationships and being with people who are perhaps not the best for you, and thinking about the discussions we have with those people and how our other relationships are informed by that. I just love this book so much. I think Southern is phenomenal. I love the way she observes things and thinks about things, and I am enjoying this just as much the second time as I did the first time, so I can only imagine I will also give this a 5-star again. And I'm very excited to finish reading it and also to read her new book that's coming out in September. So those are all of the books that I read in the month of July / am currently reading and will finish before July is done. If you are new to my channel, I would love to have you stick around and subscribe. Additionally, if you have read any of these books or you're now interested in reading them, I'd love to hear from you down in the comment section below. I hope you're having a great rest of your day whenever you watch this, and I will talk to you next time. Bye.